Okay, everyone. So welcome to the PAPC critique with guest artist, master plein air painter Don Yang. And we will be doing about 14 paintings tonight. And yeah, we can just get started. And so
Okay,
everybody
then
please mute.
I'm
Yes.
gonna put up my the album that contains everybody's painting. Before I get to that, I'd like to say a couple of things. Number one, I collected them in the order of your submission. So first person submitted is going to be talked about first, and so on. And also, just like in many cases, in every cases when you critique, it is a product of how I paint, what I value in my paintings, in relation to with regard to plein air painting. So there's a lot of personal preference, if you will. I'm sure that's going to be part of it. So please take it with some grain of salt or some understanding and acceptance of that as well. And also, even though most of you sent me the photo references, obviously there's a limitations between what I see on the photo reference versus painting, because when you're painting, the light changed and so on. So there is some limitations in that as well. So please be understanding of those things there. So I'm going to share my album.
And there was something I was going to say, but what was it now? It just slipped my mind.
I'm going to put it up here. Critique. And I have to select all of them
if
here.
a few people won't be here, but it's being recorded, so they will they can, they'll catch it later. Pam Hulvey, I think, is the first one, and she's not on yet. So
yeah, so this is Pam's painting. It's the Canal Street Railroad Bridge painting. I don't know the exact size, but vertical format. So a few things here. I'm going through my notes here. I really like the sense of a really foreground versus background sense created by very strong impasto paint on the tree on the left-hand side, very thick brush strokes and so on, versus much soft appearance in the background, including that the shadow part of the bridge and more like a bluish, purplish background and so on. So that gives a good sense of what is foreground versus what is background there. The one I like to point out here is this being the bridge, the solid steel structure and so on. We don't need to have very hard edges, but I like to see some little more of the rigid lines here and there to indicate the character of the material that it was being painted. As just like the trees like to have, tree leaves have to have some sense of texture and so on. Now the bridge house and bridge being a man-made structure, solid structure, in some places, not overall, but some places, which I'd like to see some sense of the structure, solidity or rigidity. That's what I can see that can be added further. And another thing is the perspective. Now this is the scene that she was looking at. So she was looking at slightly from an angled view, which means the bridge house should not be so much parallel between the top and bottom. It should have some sense of a converging line, as you can see. It's not too severe, but only time one can see the bridge house in that frontal view would be if somebody is facing the bridge house straight on there. So just a little bit of the perspective, the aspect of that, basically the drawing aspect of that. I mentioned the impasto strokes of the tree leaves and so on. But at the same time, you like to have some variation in size, what is in the front, what is in the back. So for instance, some brush strokes on the ground below the tree leaves, you like to treat it with a little smaller strokes that were in a sense of the depth, sense of the distance, that will enhance the sense that the tree is much more foreground and the ground is receding background that help there as well. About the colors, color mixture, she could have used a little bit of a temperature control and intensity control. That way, right now the colors greens are pretty much more similar the greens between the leaves and the grass and the right-hand side behind the pilings and so on. So depending on which one is in the shadow, which one is in the foreground, which is the foreground, maybe mix in some complementary colors perhaps, or the cooler temperature here and there, and so on, the different values and so on. That'll also add those more realistic sense of that as well. Okay. Now, on the right side corner, you see the piling. They call it dolphins, the people in that industry. At the bottom of that, you like to add some darker value onto that. That way, it doesn't look like it is completely detached from the water itself. Without it, it can look like the piling is sitting on top of the water on the flat image, as opposed to it's coming out of the water appearance to it. So perhaps you give some darker value at the very bottom. Basically, it is part of the cast shadow or the reflection that touches on the very bottom of that well. The watercolor, we know that changed quite a bit during the time period that she was painting or we are painting. But perhaps that the blue at the bottom below the railing of the bridge, maybe a little too intense or too sweet. That's something that requires a lot of observation and color mixing aspect of it. That way, it doesn't look like the color from the tube of maybe cerulean blue or cobalt blue, that kind of appearance to it. Okay. So I like to really be focusing on the bridge house itself, but those are things that I noticed that perhaps that could have improved this painting instead. And finally, at some point, depending on where the focal point is, maybe you could use a little smaller brush to not so much of a detail, but more texture, more the sense of a character. That'll be more added aspect that probably do it at the last stage of the painting. So those are the things that I noticed that perhaps that could have improved this painting further. Okay. Moving on to next painting, it's a Jill. Jill said she's not going to be here, but she sent me a message that she wanted to go after not so much of the realistic appearance, but give some sense of the mood that she wanted to create. I suppose that's when we went out that day. I think it was slightly rainy or overcast day. So it's a very tough topic under that light situation. There are a lot of things happening and really deep depths she's looking at there. So quite a bold topic that she has chosen there. Let's see. I was looking at the statues, the Spirit of Music statue and the light pole. They seem to be a little too similar, orange-yellow color, when we know that one is made out of a different material from the other. So that's kind of something that stood out. And also the value-wise, that the statue being vertical object, which means it is not facing the light at the right angle. So naturally, and also material itself, they were the dark material anyways. So perhaps that could have been a little darker value. That's the thing that I noticed there. And she really has a really big, tackled a big challenge of looking at deep depth to that. So this painting is so much about how to handle the depths of the row of the buildings going back and so on, how to create that. For that, I think a few things that would enhance that. Number one would be, of course, as usual, the edges. So as things recede, we get to see less of the hard edges. So just watch out for any unnecessary hard edges as things recede back. And second thing is of the color intensity. So it's something that you can still have the very intense color if that's what she wanted to. But then depending on how far they are, you like to have some progressively diminishing color intensity to create that sense of the depth as well. That's what I noticed that as well. What else I wrote down here? Okay. Oh, the greens. So she's got the green hedges here and then also leaves. So I think I talked about it a little bit when I did the demo. Try to compare those different greens, how different they are, how they are positioned or facing the light in different angles. Hedges, again, it is vertical object. So clearly you can see the top part is that's more horizontal facing the light source, that's much lighter. And then other than that, the verticality of that is quite dark. So you like to indicate that. So if I were to do it, I would certainly have pushed the dark of the vertical aspect of the hedges in the front there. And the tree-wise, I would provide a little more value differences right now, especially right around the tree trunk area. They are pretty much the similar values there. I think that could have gone with a little darker value and also value differences between the darker part of the leaves and the lighter part of the leaves, which means the lighter part being, again, the part that is facing the light source, the sun, and so on there. So those are what I noticed there. Oh, the tree also. Just have to be careful not to make the trees too monotonous, same dark value, okay? There are a lot of colors, even the overcast stage, you can see some are a little lighter, darker, also some places a little warmer than cool, some other places and so on. So if you make it too monotonous, the same value, it gives a more symbolic appearance of the tree as opposed to naturalistic appearance of tree that is exposed to the light. So that's something that you have to be careful about. And a lot of smaller branches and so on. Now we have to be careful not to overdo it, but those are some things that you can add the periphery of the trees. Often I know the watercolorist and oil painting too, I would use very beat up, irregular brushes and give some tapping motion on top of it to provide that abstract, but very smaller brush appearance, the leaves appearance to it. That way it's not too much limited skeleton appearance to it as a natural tree, okay? What else? I talked about the watching out for the edges on the building, compare the different greens, and also the greens in the foreground. Again, I would definitely mute it down by mixing some complementary colors and so on. That way, the more the similar values and color intensities or edges between front and back, you will tend to compress the depth, the distance, and we know there's quite a bit of depth in this setup there. So something that you have to be careful for. Once you include some good distance in your painting, if that's the part of your painting, just watch out for not to compress the distance too much, and they use those color temperatures and all the details. Obviously, you don't want to add too much details in the background. So those are the tools that we use to create a sense of depth, whether it be color temperature, color intensity, edges, details, and the size, that's another thing, and so on. And of course, in this case, perspective lines there. Okay. Next one is Barbara's painting. Very nice.
Okay, Barbara is here. Barbara is here.
Okay, so this is Barbara.
Yes, I am. I'm here. Hello.
Okay, hi, Barbara. So number one is I really like the leading walkway towards the house. So it's got one grouping of the plants and grass and flowers, and the other one left side, so nicely opens up. So things like that gives a very inviting feeling to it, to the viewer. So it's almost like you are welcome to come walk right into the house. So that nice mood to that. Also, I like that nice dark right next to the white siding right above the stairs. That really sets the stage for the house. And also you can see that has the hardest edge of the entire house there. So that being such a focal point, again, that draws the eyes right into that. That means now I'm walking up the stairs there. So that I emphasized so many times before, but setting those darks from the beginning as a placeholder, so to speak, that really sets the stage for you to build the painting from there. So I really like that. I'm going to lay down some random in order here. The flowers, they're nice, lovely flowers, really the red flowers, especially popping up against the greens. That's very nice. But this is the picture here. And I would vary the size of the flowers so that as it goes further, as you can see here, with the smaller strokes, that again, that goes nicely well with the sense of distance between foreground, first step, all the way down back to the stairs. So I would add some smaller pinks and reds that goes further, and the larger ones. You already have very larger ones there, but I would give more receding size, smaller size towards the background there. So that's what I noticed there. And the plants at both the left and right side. At the bottom of that, later I'm going to talk about it when I took a look at the Deborah's painting. I would go with a little darker value at the base of those plants, right meeting where it meets the ground, and also slightly warmer temperature to suggest a warm heat reflected from the ground there. So again, think of this as almost like the box and block. So you can see that at the base of that nice dark there, just treat it very transparently. That way you can always build up toward it. And then go with a little warmer temperature at the top along the level of the flowers, and maybe add more yellows and so on. So again, even all this, the abstract and very irregular shapes, complicated shapes, start thinking about it as, okay, what if I put this in the box format, where it's going to be the top of the box, which is facing the light source, therefore it's going to be warmer and lighter, whereas in the side plane of the box. And again, finally, this being planar painting, that you like to indicate sense of heat, sense of light, sense of temperature. Generally, in my painting, I like to brush in a little bit of, say, burnt sienna or transparent oxide red at the bottom of that. The plants, even the trees as well. I'll talk about it later on in somebody else's painting as well. Okay. Now here, I guess depending on when she took this picture, I see more shadow pattern there, but here, shadow pattern is not quite, it's almost slightly random appearance to shadow pattern on the house, I'm sorry. So I don't know at what stage she saw that you can see the shadow pattern happening right next to the doorway or under the eaves and so on. So she must have chosen certain particular stage where the shadow pattern is different, but one way or another, I like to see some sort of pattern that she saw there, that way it doesn't look random appearance to it.
Okay. Yes, I didn't quite get to that. Yes, I understand. I see it too. And then this is, to me, it looks like kind of bluish gray. They are a little tougher to indicate the light because you have to mix some sort of yellow, but then if you overmix the yellow to the blue, then you can turn it green. So that's always tricky. Whenever you try to warm up the temperature of the blue object, blue siding, blue any object, blue chimneys, and so on, because we tend to have to use some the indication of the warmth by adding yellow. But if we overdo it, it's going to turn the blue into green as opposed to warm blue. So it is a tricky situation there. Okay. And again, I guess it's the same situation here. Because on here, because apparently of the warm light, little what is that called? The white trims, they seem to be more yellow. So I'm not sure whether it's actually slightly beige yellow or because it's receiving very intense warm light. But here I'm seeing more of the white appearance to it. So even the white object, I rarely go with just straight white if that white object is exposed to light. I like to add some sense of maybe yellow ochre, maybe very light orange, very high key orange that is. That way the white doesn't look like white, but white object that is receiving the temperature of the sunlight there. So this kind of the white will be much more appropriate for more overcast day where light is very cool. Then you don't want to overplay the warmth of the yellow mixed into the white. Then it's going to look like different the light situation where the light is very warm there. I like the irregular appearance of the background trees, very simply treated without doing too much. Sometimes I myself get caught up with it and overdeveloping it, but leaving the background tree appearance just simple, also very painted very thinly. That's another thing that enhances the sense of depth by going with the thin and much more irregular appearance to it as opposed to more descriptive appearance in the foreground. So I think that sets the stage very nicely for the house to really to pop out. And even the doorway, nice warm, the reddish appearance to it that really stands out. So it really is a nice inviting painting. That's how we feel about this painting.
Okay, thank you, Don. Those are very helpful.
And next one is Dr. Hong. Okay, this embassy from Little Italy, I'm assuming. A few things here. I like the kind of like everyday scene. I mean, sometimes I like to paint very notable architectural, very iconic appearance, the object, the subject matter too, but this one very everyday, neighborhood painting, the scene appearance to it. So I like that. And also I like the something that pops out right away is very strong color contrast of the blue sky against kind of orangish. This is the scene that he was looking at there. Orangish, kind of an intensified color you can see there. That really makes it really jump out. As you know, those two colors, they are complementary color combination there. So there's that. What else? I was looking at the shadow. Obviously, the side of the building is in the shadow right here. You can see it. So it's got very sufficient darker value, darker than light side. But at the same time, I like to indicate in my shadow some sense that beyond the darker value, which is necessary, but beyond that, which is temperature difference, cooler temperature, and also a little the lack of chroma or de-intensified or grade, pretty much the same term that I'm trying to use here. That way, it is dark. The shadow doesn't turn out to be just darker version of the light side, but it contains some sense of cooler temperature and also grayness to that. So I would de-intensify and cool down the temperature on the side of the building to indicate the or add the sense of the shadow that comes along where it contains the temperature change and the intensity change as well. I don't know what what he happened to be looking at when he was painting, as opposed to when he took the picture right here. But just watch out for that very strong purple within the windows. Those 2 or 3 or 4 purples there might have been the reflection he saw it when he was painting the particular part. Just be careful not to have such an isolated, intense color there. So anytime when you deal with anything seen through the window or reflected upon from the windows, just be careful not to overplay its high value. If you do that, then it's going to look like you are looking right through the clear glass without anything behind it, or very strong the isolated color. When I take a look at entire painting, those purple kind of stands out very strongly on its own there. So again, this is a limitation of what I can say, critique, because I was not looking at the particular moment, that particular part there. So, but I'm kind of guessing that might have been a reflection there. I like the fact that he added a couple of people there. Now, he adds often people in his paintings. I think it has to do with he does a lot of gesture drawings and so on, sketching, urban sketching and so on, where he does a lot of people drawing and so on. So it gives a lot of confidence in the people that adds more liveliness as opposed to just building all on its own. And adding the people is not easy unless you do more regularly drawings and sketching of the people. So so I always like his painting whenever he adds some people there. Just watch out for the edge at the bottom of their feet. They are kind of creating too much of a tangent against that long line there. If that happens, they can look like they are walking on sort of a very thin single log or something like that. So just avoid that appearance to it. And that comes to the same thing, the tangent, the matter of the tangency with the flags as well. The bottom corner of the flags that happens to be touching the bottom, I'm sorry, the top of the green line there. So perhaps you can overlap so that that'll give the sense that they are flags and not receding or just touching right, uniformly touching the top of the signage there. So I would just kind of drag down a little bit irregularly. That way they are not too nicely lined up or the tangency there. The lettering. In painting, the letters and numbers, they are such a powerful drawing elements. Whenever we see the painting, as soon as there's the letters and the numbers, before we start looking other things, we get to immediately read numbers. So now if this was commissioned by the owner of this building, then obviously you like to make sure it's recognizable. But you can still make them recognizable without having such a clear cut the edges and clarity to it. You can have a little broken up appearance to it. So basically convert the letters, numbers into the shapes. Shapes, the Y have certain shape, A has certain shape, S has certain shape, and so on. At least that's how I like to treat the letters and numbers in the painting. That way they don't become too dominant in relation to the shapes of the colors and compositions and so on. The waters, if I were to do it, I would have indicated some sprayed appearance to it. How I would do it, I may work some dry paint on it or clean brushes to give some tap around those the body of you already created. That way it'll give them more sprayed or the susceptible to the wind, the blowing around appearance to it. So this is a very good blocking, but then all you have to do is probably go back while it's still wet with a dry brush without any pigment at all, give it some tap outward. Or if it's a wind is causing one directional shift, then run the brush in the direction of the wind and so on. Water is always very challenging. I'm sure everybody agrees. And water is, depending on whether it's gonna be, fountain water or falling water or stagnant water, so many different waters. So water is definitely deserves some practice. So water is very hard. It's not easy, but it's very challenging there. Another thing is I'm not quite sure what that is on the surface of the greenish, the greenish blue on the top of the facade. I'm assuming that might have the shadow at the bottom of that. So if that was the shadow, I would perhaps to start off with a mixture of the color that you have used for that material of the fountain first, and make it darker, make it grayer, and make it cooler. But still, often what I describe as a shadow of an apple should have some sense, some relation to the red. A shadow of the lemon should have some relation to the yellow, but converted into darker, cooler, and gray, and so on. So, so that's not, I was not quite clear about that. Trees, it's got nice darker and lighter value, but I would have intensify the darker part, which means the shadow part of that. So the color intensity seems a little too strong to be in the shadow. Now the value is perfectly fine. You should have very nice deep dark value, but the mixing some, it's complementary color and so on. That way, again, the shadow creates some sense of not only darker value, but also some cooler temperature, more grayness
that you can see there. Having those grayness put in will also enhance the light side of the tree as well. And what else I got here? Shadow on the fountain. Oh, just a small thing here, but just watch out for the perspective lines, so all that converging lines. Make sure they're consistent so that consistently receding towards the vanishing point that's somewhere outside of your picture plane there. So that's something that you have to be careful. Or sometimes if you think you made a mistake, what I would do is I would perhaps to the very top of the roof or somewhere it is not consistent, then you can extend some trees to hide it. Sometimes that can work as well. But one way or another, it doesn't have to be architecturally perfect perspective appearance to it, but just to avoid mistaken perspective appearance in terms of converging lines there. So those are the things that I noticed there about the color intensity of the trees or the waters and the perspective and the shadow characteristics and so on. Okay.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So let's move on to next person is Anna. Now, very ambitious, bold view she has chosen. I saw some of her other paintings. She's very bold in seeing the larger spaces. She's very good at that. So that's something that requires a lot of confidence in her. A really nice treatment of the water. The water that day, I know that the water was very calm. Later on, we'll see in the painting of the arts, the painting as well. He showed it very nicely as well. So I really like the nice reflection of the water there. Now, a few other things. Her painting has a very high chroma, very sweet color appearance to it, which is very good. It's very attention grabbing, so to speak, appearance to it. But at the same time, if you are to depict a very, very deep depths, such as this view, even though in the camera lens captures pretty much the very similar way, you just like to have to be a little careful with the chromatic strength between foreground and background. So just like Jill's painting of the Michigan Avenue, this painting is so much about how to create that sense of a depth, sense of a distance between foreground and background, between your focal point versus secondary, tertiary elements and so on. For that, if I were to paint, number one, I would have added some complementary colors into the more bluish appearance to it. Certainly objects in the foreground, you like to tilt towards more bluish color palette to indicate the atmosphere. But I would have knocked down the chromatic strengths a little bit as they moved far background there. And another thing we talked about also the edges. Just like to be careful about the edges of the foreground buildings, because when I take a look at it, the edges of the Sears Tower or Willis Tower is very strong to a point. It's competing against the edges of the bridge, which is much closer to her. So I would have liked to gone with a much softer edges on the foreground buildings as well. And the perspective, where else I can see it? Also the value structure. Not only the chromatic grayness you like to control, but also value of that, particularly that the Willis building seems to be, if you squint down, that is just as dark as the bottom of the bridge. So whenever that happens, you are bring them to the same picture plane as opposed to one is far ground, probably a couple of miles back versus the bridge much closer to the painter. Okay, so controlling the value structure, controlling the chromatic structure. Basically, you like to have some hierarchy of those chromatic strengths and the value strengths and then edge differences as well. Okay. The darker mass on the behind the bridge, right here. So it is there. I know she paints in acrylic, so technical aspect, I do not have much knowledge on how to do it, but one way or another, you like to plug it in with a little lighter and more transparent appearance. So you can have very dark values, and that is very necessary, but that value and also the counterpart at the bottom or edge of the front of the red, the walkway, the boardwalk, that seems to be a little opaquely dark. I'm not sure whether that's because I'm looking at it in the screen image, whatnot, but that seems to be a little too strong there. And also the dark in the foreground, I think that's the Roosevelt the Street bridge there, that really dark value right up against the height of the bridge. When I take a look at it, that has the strongest contrast of light against the dark to be in the foreground there. So again, mostly so much is about the manipulating those value structure, edge structure, chromatic structure to create a sense of a deep depth between what is in the foreground and the background. That's what if I were to paint this, how I would have approached there. And Yelena's painting of this turkeys here, it's not easy to the moving creatures, especially I know they are not staying still, so it's tough. So that's when what I like to encourage my younger students is to do a lot of sketches and drawings in the zoos and even the museums and so on to start off with before you go to actually sketching the live tigers and whatnot and so on. It's very challenging, same with the people, so on. So very lively topic, obviously, the living object or very moving objects and so on. Now, what I like about this is this is a very color-oriented painting. Even though here you see very dark values in this photo reference there, she replaced that with a much more color sensible, more purples and blues and so on. So very closer to more impressionistic approach to the painting. So that gives much more liveliness to it, which goes very well with the living objects there. And also strong impasto and brush strokes, especially in the foreground, that works very nicely to bring them far foreground. Again, add more the animated liveliness of the living creatures that worked out very nicely. And one thing is these turkeys, they are feathered objects, so I would definitely exploit more soft edges to the periphery of their wings and so on. So you can start off with a very impasto stroke and a strong color sensation and thick brush strokes and paints. But after that, maybe perhaps come back with some clean dry brushes to break up those such hard rounded edges to give much more naturalistic appearance of the feathers and so on. That's what I would have done it if I were to do it. The background, again, similar thing here. I would soften the value strengths and chromatic strengths a little bit, especially the shadow right next to the trash can. So this is what the photograph shows, but we know when we paint, we are manipulating to give the sense of the distance. So I would do without such a hard dark value and strong chroma on the shadow in the background there too. And also by doing so, that doesn't pop up so strong, and then that will help to make the turquoise much more important there. What else? Yeah, so those are the things I noticed in this painting. Very chaotic scene these turkeys provide to you. For that, I think you have a good control of grouping them together and so on there. Okay. And next person is Deborah. Yeah, the statue of or bust of Mr. Plein. I like painting statues and so on. There's so much interest.
I think Deborah's here too. Deborah just came in. So.
Okay. And also in this case, the sense of a history, something topic that I like. So I like to paint the statues of General Grant, or in this case, Pink Tom, and so on there. So this is the painting, and now in this case, the Mr. Pink Tom is flanked by, or surrounded by, or backdropped by the trees. So if I were to do it, I would maximize what I can do with the trees to enhance his presence. So depending on where dark is, where the light is in his head, I would take extra liberty to enhance that. So in other words, if there's a lighter part on the statue, like top of the head, I would push the dark and even hard edges behind push the dark and create a hard edge in the head to make it really pop out. Or if there's some parts of the statue, I like to diminish it, perhaps below the shoulder, it's a dark there. If I do not like to pop out too much, then I would go the darker value and also almost use the lost edge. That way to create very strong focal point on his head to that. So all that the leaves and branches on the tree, you can see in here, willow tree, maybe willow trees. So I would take extra liberty to use them, not so much of a description of the leaves and so on, but just enough sense of the tree, but let them be more the helping agent to make his face, his head really pop out. So that's how I would treat it. So basically, I'm exploiting the background values to enhance his presence further. As far as trees are concerned, just be careful not to be careful to avoid such a repeating same monotonous appearance of the tree leaves. You can see almost like they are stacked up, same size and shape appearance to it. So when I paint, especially trees and so on, I would stand far back and I just look at the trees as abstract shapes and patterns to avoid too much of a monotonous appearance to it, some odd shapes, odd tangencies. So treat them as such, as opposed to not so much of individual leaves and so on. Unless the tree, I was painting the trees as a portrait of the tree, because I do love painting those trees as individual trees. But in this case, trees, like to make sure that they are not distracting. In nature, there's not so much of a monotonous repeating pattern until there's a big difference between pattern and monotony. Pattern is not necessarily monotony. So we certainly are, as an artist, we are going after capturing those patterns, but just be careful not to become too much of a repeating monotonous appearance to it. And I know she does watercolor, so I'm not a watercolorist, but when I do watercolor, mostly like sketches and so on, to me, I like to lay down some darks from the very beginning. Now, more traditional watercolorists, they like to build up the layers and the dark. So basically, what I'm looking at here is I would have pushed some darks on the lower part of the face. Obviously, light is coming from the top, and especially in this case, his head is tilted slightly downward. So I would have put down the shadow from the beginning, because I paint watercolor more like oil painter. Or if you like to work more traditional way of watercolor, then you like to build up some layers of the darks to support the darker part at the bottom of his face. And what else? The back side of that as well. Okay. What else? Willow shapes I talked about, uniformity. I'm just reading off my note that I wrote before. So now we talked about earlier of the Jill's painting about the darker part of the hedges. So this is a good example of I really like, and that's how I would like to paint even watercolor. The darks at the bottom of those the plants and grass next to the trees and so on, that really sets the stage for her to lay down some nice warm lights in the top part of the trees as well. So you can see that the darks right next to the bottom of the trees and so on, or behind the monument and so on. So that really nicely sets the stage for the statue really rise up from that. So I really like that treatment that she had added. After that, the background, even though here in the picture we can see clearly what they are, but personally, I don't really feel that it's necessary to indicate this. I think what she had done is just perfectly fine, just enough to give add impact to the bust or the statue of Mr. Ping Tom there. I think that worked out nicely, the way she treated with less detail, soft edges and background. So I think that worked out very nicely there. Okay. And next person is Dorothy.
Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. The 18th Street the bridge she painted with the bridge tender house there. I like she tackled a lot of geometry of the bridge shape, the curved line, rigid verticality, that is a kind of competing in a good sense with the natural appearance of the shapes of the trees and so on. And again, the bridge in between those trees, so there's no mistake of where the focal point is here. And then she's got also very deep depth. She doesn't have the picture, so but I know what it looks like behind the bridge. It has a lot of buildings and banks of the river and so on. So it does contain very challenging depths as well. One thing for sure is the dark of the bridge is very good and important, but I would have applied much thinner paint, very transparent manner, instead of a little thicker appearance that we are looking at here. So after all, that's the shadow appearance to it. So I would set down much thinner, transparent dark. And the other thing is the water itself, the blue water. I would have tempered the chroma a little bit. That way it doesn't look like too intense water as if it came straight from the tube of a cerulean blue and something like that I talked about earlier. That's the thing there. And also the tree, the right side of the tree trunk seems to be a little overly dark and too similar to the color and the value of the bridge, dark bridge to it. So you can start off with, since you painted in oil, start off with a dark value, but at one point you like to rise up to a little bit of a sense of temperature and variation in value instead of being too similar to similar dark to the dark of the bridge there. And I wasn't quite sure that darker value right next to the tree. I am assuming that was a shadow from the trees. In that case, seems to be a little too purplish color. Again, that's the kind of things that I cannot say for sure because I'm looking at the screen image here. And the same thing I said about earlier, if it's a shadow on the sidewalk, then it should have some sense of similarity in color of the sidewalk and veered off of it with a darker value and the darker value and cooler temperature and gray color. That seems to be a little foreign to the material of the sidewalk, and then extend into the green of the grass with the same color and same value. So it seems to be, it can easily look like something, actually some object is laying on top solidly appearance to it. Okay. The right above the water, that the edge itself seems a little too hard and too much contrasting dark against the lighter value. So that stands out a little too forcefully when we know that is the receding bank towards the back, far background there. So I would have softened the edge at the bottom of that strip of kind of a maroon color there. And also I would have softened the value as well. That way it doesn't compete against the bridge, and also it'll work nicely as a distant bank moving further away in the distance. Okay. Finally, the bridge tender house that sticks up beyond the bridge. Without having to do much detail, I would have given some sense of a little more of a suggestive implied appearance of the structure, maybe some appearance of the window that was there and so on. And just be careful with that, the yellow on the side of the house that seems to be a little stands out of place there. So it was more like the brick. So it just has to do with more a color mixing experience that we all have to develop further there. And one more thing is, of course, I'm assuming that's the shadow on the water on the left side below the bridge. Again, that seems a little too extremely dark. So again, without seeing what she was observing at that point, I cannot say for sure, but seems to be a little too forcible dark there. So that's another thing I noticed there. Okay. I think that's what I wrote down here, pretty much ended there. The next one is the Liz painting here. So this is what she was looking at here. It's a very wide vast of the view that she has here. I really like the sense of a color and temperature variation in the sky, much bluer above and much more warmer temperature to it. So instead of one same single blue, that gives a good sense of a temperature, which is to me, so much is about the plein air painting as opposed to, the photo reference painting. It gives a sense of the warmth of the warm day that we are there. So I really like that. And the negative space, wide, vast openness of the sky, that worked out very nicely too. One thing I noticed is the color intensity between the tree in the left-hand side and the building behind the bridge. That seems to be a little too similar. So I would definitely have tempered down the red on the bricks of the bridge a little further. That way it doesn't have a negative effect of coming up so closer to the foreground to give it a much more deeper background appearance to it. Now, she might have intensified the leaves of the tree a little more intense, much red appearance to which, I don't see any big problem with it if she like to intensify. And also depending on what stage of the painting she took this picture. So in the morning hours, I know that the tree was much more closer to this kind of red appearance to it. So, when you compare against the photo references, one might say, well, that's a little too far off, but personally, I don't have any problem with it. And then, yeah, in a way, I like that intensity she had created there. Okay, what else? A couple of things here. In the bottom of that, a smaller aspect of it, those rocks. Either you like to describe much more convincing appearance of the rock, or I thought it kind of looked like bale of hay appearance to it, or one can just disregard and get rid of, just like she disregarded this light pole there. So basically, it's just a matter of am I communicating clearly enough so that it doesn't be mistaken for, it doesn't get mistaken for something else and so on there. Okay, I would have softened the edges of the railings on the top of the bridge, or maybe use the smaller brush. That way it gives just enough of a sense of what they are without actually making it look too thick appearance to it. What else here? Oh, the bridge, you can see the vertical aspect of the bridge in the background, they are deep in shadow, and she treated very gray appearance to it. But also I would have lighten the values while maintaining the grayness to that, because that value is especially right below the edge of the bottom of the house that seems a little too forceful. So I would definitely go with the way she treated in terms of the grayness to it, but it's a matter of the value. I would have gone with a little lighter value, as you can see in here. So that's what I would have done it there. What else I wrote down here? Okay, so those are things I noticed that as well. Again, here is the case that she has much more gray down the green aspect of it. So greens on the tree on the right hand side, they're not so much such a strong, very strong, too intense colors like coming straight from Viridian blues and so on. So she went through the color mixing stage that way. The colors are much more naturalistic appearance of the tree as opposed to too strong green appearance to it. So I really like the color mixing she had. And also you can see at the lower part of the tree, there's some sense of a little warmth, some more browns and so on. So tree should not be just all green, 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 or too intense green appearance to it. So the color she chose the trees, I really like that. And also you can see that because the tree is a vertical object, the value overall is darker than the green on the grass surrounding the rocks there. So that clearly shows one object, tree, is vertical object. The other one is the grass facing the sky. Now this is our painting there. I know that because he came down a little earlier than others when I was setting up, so the water was very calm. So he really captured that very nicely. Calm water to it. I can clearly see he's got very good drawing skill to indicate the bridges and so on. I really like kind of like the Lisa's painting, nice expanse of the sky very much there. And I like those ducks too. Gives much more liveliness to it. Sort of like how Dr. Hong did with the people, having those the animate object, people, animals, or something like that. That gives much more interest to your painting there. And this is a case that we talked about in the very first painting of the Pam about looking at the bridge house and slide in perspective. He was looking at even more stronger perspective line, but so he clearly indicated very accurately perspective and the size of the bridge and so on. That also add to where his the viewpoint was. That worked out very nicely. So, and I like the shape of the water. He captured that irregular shape down below. That also worked out very nicely there as well. So looks like he has a very strong drawing sense that sets the stage before he moves on to the color of the watercolor. And I like the simplistic approach of the trees that he had added to that. Now, this is more judgment call, but one might treat those two towering bridges with a different degree of clarity or edges if one likes to create the larger one being slightly closer to him versus the other one a little further away. So again, that's a judgment he made. So he's got more similar edges, similar values and so on. Another person might have gone with a little softer edges for the smaller bridge tower or a little the lighter value and so on. So I would say that's more of the artistic judgment that he made for that there. Now you can see there's a lot of lines and letters, whatnot, and so on. So it takes up the very simple thinking mind to simplify just enough to suggest simple few lines to that. That also indicates that something that things like this is he had dealt with before many times. So very nicely done painting there. Yeah. Okay. If anything, I would have indicated a little slightly with the small brushes without overdoing it. Kind of a rusty appearance to it that is so much of the character of this bridge and bridge house. So I might have, if I were to do it, I might have selectively, not all over, go on top of this structure here as already indicated, just a limited way. That's just to create the kind of a character this old bridge house shows, as opposed to much more clean, very modern bridge that we see some other places there. So that would be the only suggestion that I would make here. But yeah, I really like that the treatment of the bridge and the water and the sky there. This is Robin's painting of Northwestern campus, kind of a similar way that Barbara did with the walkway to lead the viewer's eye to the main focal point there. So that's the leading walkway to her focal point there. I really like the use of a temperature to indicate the shadow. So that the bluish color, purplish color, she added above the arch. Is it arch? Yeah, they are kind of the arches there. So they work nicely for the shadow. Only thing here is, if I was to do it, I would still maintain that coloration of bluish, purplish, but I might have pushed the value slightly darker, deeper into that. Okay, so that the archway doesn't look so isolated against it. If that happens, it can easily look like those dark brownish arches are not the arches, but that's something like the tents sitting in front of that. So that's the only thing. I like the choice of stronger, cooler temperature color to indicate the shadow, just that the value-wise, I might have pushed a darker, cooler temperature there. There's a nice use of temperature for the shadow. And just like earlier in the painting of the pen, this being architectural, solid stone building and so on, I know Robin has a very soft-handed, light-handed soft touch, which is very good asset for an artist to have. But in this case, I might have gone with a slightly, not necessarily hard edges, but some firm edges to indicate sense of a structure, just enough to avoid that the space above the arches doesn't look like some distant the background, but it is a solid building appearance to it. So that's because just the topic happens to be, the house or the bridge, or in this case, building, or the stone building and so on. So that would be my suggestion there. And the tree leaves, kind of the same thing. I was talking to, I forget, I'd say maybe Dr. Hong, somebody, towards the periphery of the tree leaves. You like to break them up with some, it was a Gilles painting. So maybe tap onto the periphery with the brushes, kind of irregular, slight tap, tap, tap. That way it doesn't have such a the larger appearance to it, but more irregular, smaller appearance to it, without necessarily drawing every small each individual leaves. That definitely you do not want to do that, but add those things to give smaller the leaves as it goes out towards the sky in the background and so on. Trees are very interesting, fun, but also very challenging and can be frustrating, because I like to paint the trees. So yes, that comes with a challenge of that. What else? Appearance of it. Okay. That's pretty much what I noticed in painting. Also, coming back to the trees, just the shape of the trunk of the trees and so on. That's something that, again, we can learn much from the drawing exercises and so on to indicate the naturalistic appearance of the trees that you like to go after, like you like to avoid such a obvious the symmetrical shape. I'm looking at the far background tree, such a clear-cut V shape and so on. So something that requires a little more experience and practice onto that. But I really like the warm temperature on the sidewalk, the front, the walkway there. Oh, that's one thing I forget. I would have separated the light against the shadow on the walkway with a little stronger value contrast between the light side and the shadow side, light shape and shadow shape. There's certainly very strong temperature change, temperature difference between the warmth of the light part of the sidewalk or walkway and the shadow side. Just the value is something that I would have pushed a little deeper between the warm light and cooler shadow. Kind of a similar thing I pointed out to the background building above the arches, that I really like the temperature, use of a cooler temperature, but the value is something that you like to push a little further to that. Okay. This is the Helen's painting from Carmel. Yeah, I really like the interesting, very abstract, interesting shapes of the rocks as a larger shapes, and within the larger shapes, smaller shapes within as well. One is very large and wide, the other one is very long, elongated, and so on. So they worked out very nicely. Some sense of a good texture that worked out very nice as well. The water-wise, again, this, well, no, she didn't have the picture. So again, the water-wise, I'm assuming it was a more moving water as opposed to what we saw on Art's the reference, because that was exactly like that when he painted, he first came in. So we talked about water earlier with Dr. Hong's painting of the water fountain and so on. Mm-hmm. So water, again, is very tough depending on, how gushing tide it is, or rippling water and so on. So that's something that I do not seeing the photo reference. I don't know what kind of situation was, but that's something that you like to exploit some sense of a movement, unless it was absolutely very calm. That might have been the case there. So that's one thing I noticed there. Okay, let's see. What I wrote down is sharp edges on the foreground rocks in the same sharp. Oh, what I was writing down here is I really like the foreground rock against the dark, the background, the dark valley behind. That really makes it really sharp. And then after that, it progressively soft the edges. Again, edges and textures, valley contrast, that works very nice. They are very good tools for us to indicate a sense of depth. So from even here, it gives a good sense that this rock is far foreground. As it goes backwards, it's softened. Even the hard as rock, literally, you can have that appearance to it. And what I noticed was the the background. On the other hand, the background, this long strip of the rock formation, I would have softened that, both the contrast between the top of the rock against the background, and also that the hard edge in the background and so on. Because again, this is a very long distance. So I really like the very top edge, really thin strip of jutting out part there that gives a really nice shape that is seen from the foreground. But the long elongated rock in the midground is the one that I would have compared against the foreground to make sure that stays in its rightful place. So for that, the upper left corner, I really like the treatment of that nicely receives and exits out of your picture plane there. So again, I see really nice, interesting shape combination of the rock. So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 very simplistic shape. And you may remember that's what I talked about when I did a demo on Sunday, reducing very complicated setup into limited number of shapes. And then after that, you start breaking down to secondary shapes and tertiary shapes and so on. So I think she treated it very nicely amongst those shapes there. And here is the part also we talked about the greens. Her greens also has much more controlled greens, if I can use that word, so that it is not too the sharp intensity all around. So it's just a mixture of the greens, so by mixing some complementary colors and so on. That gives a much more naturalistic appearance of the green that we see in the nature there. So, and I'm assuming that darker part of the water right next to the rock cropping, that was there to again enhance that color contrast and edge contrast there. If that was the case, I think that worked out very nicely to give us, I'm seeing a little bit of, yeah, so that worked out very nicely there as well. So just the making a contrast work for you. So always maintain the hierarchy. Okay, where is the strongest contrast you like to go? Where is the secondary and so on? So I think that worked out very effectively here as well. Okay, so I really like that aspect of that, and then the texture of the rocks and so on there. Okay.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. And Lori's painting, and it gives a nice mood to it. And few things here. The left lower corner and the upper right corner of the deep dark greens and also shadow at the bottom, that really sets the stages. The three elements sets the stage to point the viewer's eye right into main focal point of the house there. And also you see very strong dark, the contrast, strong contrast between shadow side and the light side right down the center of the painting. So location is another thing, and the edge is another thing to enhance the sharp, the focal point there. So that worked out very nicely there. And I really like the white picket fence there, just a suggestive appearance to it instead of going up to one individual picket and so on. So a lot of suggestive feel to it without over describing it. That I think that worked out very, very nicely there. Now, as far as color temperatures is concerned, clearly when we see this kind of a strong value contrast, we assume there's a very strong light, which means light gives nice strong value contrast, but also very strong temperature contrast. In that, I would have intensified the warmer temperature on the light side of the building a little stronger. So you got very intense cool temperature in the shadow that worked out nicely. In a way, even though the light side does not have as much temperature warmer temperature I would like to see, but because of the temperature of the shadow is very, very, very cool, that worked out well. But I would still have indicated a warmer temperature on the light side of the building there further to it. What I wrote down here, it was, yeah, I really like the loosened up appearance of the tree without going after individual smaller individual leaves appearance to it. Very abstract, very the flicked off of the brush type of appearance to it, to the periphery of the tree leaves. That worked out very nicely. What else I wrote down here? Warmth of the temperature. Now I'm looking at some dark values on the sidewalk next to the grass. Again, kind of a similar thing I mentioned in Dorothy's painting, that the dark of the shadow on the sidewalk seems to be a little too enhanced, too strong to be the shadow of the sidewalk when I compare against light. So often I would say the shadow of the lemon should be not as dark as the shadow of an apple, the red apple. So in this case, if this was the sidewalk of the lemon, the shadow of the sidewalk is more like the shadow on the apple appearance of it. I'm not sure I'm explaining accurately. So basically,
that's a good explanation.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
it makes sense to me. I get it.
Yeah, the shadow might have been little. Another way you can think about it, you can take a look at the shadow, darker value, that is as dark as the side of the building, the shadow on the side of the building. So that's another thing that you can compare. So just like you like to compare the different greens together, kind of group them up and then compare them. Here, you check all the shadows in different places, the shadow of the tree, shadow of the sidewalks, shadow of the vertical plane of the building, shadow on the horizon diagonal plane of the building. And are they in proper order, or are they too similar and so on? That's one way you can check on that. And this is something that I like to do in planar painting, is even within the shadow, as it comes down to the lower part, I'm talking about the side of the shadow on the side of the building. Even though it's a shadow, because it happens to be standing right next to the sidewalk, there has to be some light reflecting off of the sidewalk. So which means I'd like to brush in some warmer temperature at the base of the shadow of the building there. To me, things like that is what separates painting done from plein air versus painting done from photo references, because the cameras do not show those things there. Something that the warm temperature you will feel. So see if you can seek out and notice those the slight warmer temperature and gently brushing. I like to do that when surface is wet, so that I can, with a clean clean brush, and gently go one stroke, just one go at it, to indicate all that bouncing light that's happening in plein air painting there. But that's a nice, good stage for the shadow, and they just need to that small touch of that. But again, coming back to it, give a nice mood to the painting, and the surrounding set of nice greens really bring them. If you can think of those the trees, they are pointing, all those three, particularly those two, one right upper corner and the lower left corner. They are kind of pointing the viewers to the house, as if they're saying, "Hey, look at this! I'm pointing you to this house." So I think that worked out very effectively there. And sure, you're welcome. I think that's all I wrote here. And final painting is Christian. Very nice, lovely painting with very high chromatic, very high key painting. So in this case, there is not much of a deep dark value, which is fine, as long as it's consistent. So in other words, they're very color-oriented painting, not so much of let's say more value-oriented, like kind of things that I emphasize a lot. From the beginning, we lay down the deep dark and so on. That again, that's much more traditional academic way of studying it here. But here, only place that is darkest way those tree branches and trunks. Other than that, if you hide that with your hand, the rest of them, even the dark of the sunflowers, they are not that deep dark. So it's very color oriented. You can see she inserted a little purple in the foreground. Probably that is not really purple there, but who cares? It's harmonious with the rest of the colors. So very uplifting color palette that she had laid down. And also, I think the background worked out very nicely, very soft, non-descriptive, very soft edges, and so on. That really sets the stage for these sunflowers. The lady in red hat really pop out. So there's no mistake when somebody takes a look at this painting, no mistake where the focal point is. And those background just does enough work as extras in the movies. To add the importance of that. If anything, I might have gone, if I were to paint this, might have gone with even lighter value for the trees as well. That's the only thing that I might have done it, but even as it is, I think it worked out very nicely there. A few things here. Try to be careful in limiting your brush strokes. That way, it doesn't break up the integrity of larger forms. When I say larger forms, it doesn't have to be large in painting, but larger form of the arm of the lady. Just be careful not to overwork. You can see a lot of smaller brush strokes into that. Something that you like to be careful not to have more disintegrated appearance to it. So I'm sure she laid down large solid form of the arms in the beginning, but of course at one point we need to go back into that to differentiate the light from the shadow and so on. Just be careful not to overdo it. And similar thing happens in some other places, maybe draperies and so on. It's a human nature. As soon as we start working with smaller brushes, we end up, overdoing it. And I catch myself, falling into that trap all the time anyways, myself. So just watch out for that. And anytime we have the object that's standing upright, just watch out for the verticality of that. That way, the vertical object doesn't look like they are tilting, whether it's trees or houses or booths and so on. Just be careful about those things there. The tree leaves and so on. Just be careful again not to tackle it with a lot of smaller individual brush strokes. So just give very broadly. The less you treat them with the individual brush strokes, the stronger your focal point is going to be. and clearly with the intense color of the hat or her dress and strong contrast between the red of the dress, a long dress and the blue blouse and so on. So there is no mistake as to, you know, where she'd like to really focus on focal point here. So again, most of all, it has much more uplifting color palette that gives a very nice and sweet painting appearance to it. So I think that worked out very nicely here. Okay. That is the last painting. So I guess I need to stop sharing, right? Lori?
Yes,
Okay.
stop sharing.
All
There
right.
we go. Well, that was an excellent critique. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I hope it was helpful. Again, it's really hard for me to, and for anybody for that matter, when I teach a class in the classroom, when I'm teaching figure painting, my students and I, low battery here, my students and I are looking at the model in front of us simultaneously. So I can clearly see and then show it to them, you know, hey, look at this color and so on. But whenever I teach like plein air painting, or when I teach still life painting, when they are painting in the classroom, I'm looking at the same object. I can point out exactly, but when I give them homework where they have to do still life painting at home, then there's a limitation of me not being able to see what they are looking at. So hopefully, you know, that doesn't hinder your, or, you know, what I was trying to get across there. So there's a difficulty there. So please be understanding of that. So.
Well, it was
Very
excellent.
helpful.
Anybody have anything they want to
Any
say?
questions or anything?
I love critiques. This is Christiane. You probably can't see me too well, but
Yes.
I love critiques. I think you learn so much from critiques, both on my own work and somebody else's work. I love it. I love this.
Yes,
great.
I agree. I do. When I was in critique, I would do individual and group critique. Individual critique, I can focus much more the strength and weakness of the particular person. But in group critique, you get to learn from others' paintings by looking at their paintings or the person who's critiquing their paintings. So something that you can always introduce to your learning experience as well. So I like them both. So one much more personalized, individualized critique, and the other one we can share and we can learn from others' strengths and their mistakes and so on. So yeah, critique is a very important part of learning processes from my teaching experience. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question or make a
Yes.
comment? I find I studied with Bay Area photorealist painters in San Francisco who painted hyper realistically from photographs. And so I have I feel like it's cheating for me when I use artistic license to you know, make something alter something to make the painting work when that's not how it looks to me. Does that make sense? Like when you said soften the line of the rock, it's like it was a sharp line, but I think you're right. I think compositionally and to make something recede, softening the lines, you know, desaturating the color, you know, softening lightening the value does make it recede. So do you, I mean, it's so funny because I feel like I'm cheating when I don't make it look as accurate as I can to what it is I'm seeing. But I guess, I mean, it's when I watch other people paint, I see other people, you know, take artistic license and interpret things. And I think it was just the way the people I was learning from originally.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it cheating. I would when I paint, I like to tell the story the way I see it, and then also I like to create the scene that how I saw seemed to be more important. What appeals to me, if bridge is more appealing to me, then I can do all the details I want, and I don't want that distracted by some other elements. So often I use the analogy of that we are same seat as the directors, where I like to set aside my main character, I like to set aside my supporting character, all the way down to extras. Even though if I take a look at, as a director, movie director, I take a look at the extra, I can see their face and nose, everything clearly. I don't want that to show such a strong intensity to compete against my main mega actor there. So I think it's more of the judgment call and what you like to do with it. At the same time, if somebody like to do very photorealistic appearance to it, that's not my cup of tea, but I don't have any problem for their art as long as it is honest to themselves, or I'm doing what is honest to me. That's why I kind of draw the line. So I like, as you said, I interpret and I tell the story how I felt, I see, as opposed to, we have a limited vision. We cannot see the bridge and trees and everything at the same time with the same clarity. Camera does that. And so I like to go after what can I clearly see, what I like to emphasize, as opposed to telling the same stories or in different stories in the same intensity, same clarity. Same with the book, in a certain part of the book, the writers maybe not describing every single detail in the room, but some places he or she may describe much in detail. So I think it's being in control of my art and telling the story instead of transcribing exactly what can be seen. If I have 10 different eyeballs that I can see bridges and all this in the same time. That's
Right.
how I like.
It's kind of like singing. I mean, different people, it's like have different styles and inflections and timbre. I mean, it's taking the same notes, but reinterpreting it.
Deb had a question.
My
Yeah.
iPad is running low in battery now.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
So I don't want to abruptly depart you. So I
Oh,
said
Deb,
full
you want to try to get your question in?
yeah, I just want to ask
Yes.
about, you mentioned that with watercolor, you start off with, you put your darks in first. And I find that to be interesting because that's kind of a hard,
It is.
Yeah.
It is very unconventional, and
Yeah.
also because I'm doing smaller type of drawings, paintings in watercolor, and also it comes from old painters' habit. In old painting, I
Right.
like to place those darks to
Put those
anchor my
darks.
paintings, but you just have to be careful. As you know, watercolor, you cannot really erase it, so that requires also a certain level of the drawing experience. So when I lay those down, I have to hold my breath and be careful with the dark, because I know I cannot make it lighter, as you know very well. So it is often it is stressful. Sometimes I wonder, why do I do this way? But in a way, it's a kind of a very intense.
But you find that helpful?
To me, what kind of things that I do? You may see some of my watercolor did in my sketches in my Instagram and so on. Sometimes I put down step by step. I go by the shape of that, and with the dark values, set the stage and so on. Yeah. So because I'm when I do a watercolor, often I do not draw out with a pencil. I go from the very beginning, not often, almost all the time, with a brush that's loaded with the color and lay things down. So I'm giving myself less margin of a mistake, and sometimes do mistake, and oh well, I move on.
Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
very
I'm
helpful.
running out of
And,
battery.
Thank you so much.
The recording should be available either tomorrow or the next day on our YouTube channel. So thank you so much, Don.
Thank you
It was
so
a
much.
great
Thank you for
Thank
listening.
you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Don.
See you
Thank
next
you.
time, everyone.
Thank
you,
you,
Don.
Don. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.